Hello, everyone. I'm Daz, and welcome to American Civil War and UK History Podcast. This presentation is available as a video on our YouTube channel or as a podcast from wherever you get your podcasts from. And remember, if you're watching on YouTube, to hit that subscribe button and give us a big thumbs up. And to keep up to date with everything American Civil War and UK history, check out our website where you'll find blog posts, podcasts, and links to all of our social media pages. The link is available in the podcast description. And joining me today is the host of History Rage podcast, Paul Bavill. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. I'm just amazed I got your name right.
You're one of only 8 people in history to have actually pronounced my name correctly, so well done.
Thank you. And I'm really bad with names normally. But yeah, today's discussion is about body snatching, which started and took place here in the UK and around the world from the late 1820s. Okay, Paul, we're going to dive straight into it. And please tell us how the practice of body snatching actually starts.
Okay, right. So we're going to go way further back because, like, pretty much everything that's unpleasant in history, you can pin that on Henry VIII. Okay, that is the initial kind of acorn that grows into the oak that is this problem. Because back in the reign of Henry VIII, he basically puts forward this idea that because we want to have anatomists and surgeons and medical science and so forth, he actually passes a law that grants the Royal College of Physicians 4 cadavers a year as a bare minimum. And you're going to get these from the gallows and so forth, which is fine, and we can then start getting onto a more even scientific keel with the rest of Europe. Places like Padua and things like that, there's long-standing history of like medical science and medical teaching. And it starts that ball rolling. And everything carries on quite nicely. You will get people from the gallows and they can be dissected and we can learn about them and move on. The trouble is when we get to the kind of late Georgian, I would say early Victorian period. By the early Victorian period, it's pretty much died out, pun intended. But when you get to the late Georgian period, we have 2 things that kind of impact on this. And it really is, for all you people out there that are like various streams of anti-government, this is great because it is just unintended consequences, just creates this. So you get people from the gallows and you can be sentenced to be hanged and dissected, and they will be delivered to various anatomy colleges as we get this increasing number of like medical students and anatomy students. And because to be a successful surgeon, what you need to do is to have dissected a human cadaver. Okay, sounds grim, but anybody out there that has had any form of surgery, I will bet my next salary that one of the thoughts that really goes through your head is, I do hope this guy's done this before. And your options for actually practicing surgery are pretty limited. So this is absolutely essential. So we sentence people to hang and we pass them over to the gallows for dissection, pass them over to the anatomists for dissection. Great. 1752, we get a thing in called the Waltham Black Act, which starts a period of history, a period of legal history known as the Bloody Code. Okay, ever heard of it?
No.
Right, okay. It is arguably one of the most draconian legal frameworks that we've ever seen, because there are, at last count, 225 separate capital offences on the British statute books at the time. Now, do you want to play a little quiz?
Go for it.
Right then, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to list you 5 crimes. 4 of these will get you a death penalty. 1 of them won't.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is to figure out which one won't. Okay, so I'm going to start with being in a public park with a blackened face after dark. Pickpocketing to the value of 5 shillings or more. Harming a horse. Damaging a fish pond. Keeping the company of gypsies for more than a month.
So you said 1 will not get you arrested or get you...
They'll all get you arrested.
Right, yeah.
one of them won't get you hanged.
Right, get you hanged. Okay, yeah. Cool, that's a tough one. Hmm. I don't know because they're all quite important things to that society of the time. I don't know. I'm really struggling here to pick
Yeah.
one.
Well, I'll put you out of your misery.
Yeah.
Out of that list, the one that won't get you a death sentence is harming a horse.
Right. Okay.
Stealing the horse will. Harming the horse is just kind of criminal damage. The rest of them all carry a death penalty. There's some other amazing ones out there as well, like impersonating a Chelsea pensioner, damaging Westminster Bridge, damaging trees. That will do it as well. And it sounds really, really draconian. You've got to imagine, though, that this is time that we don't have a police force. So there isn't really a huge amount in the way of law enforcement. So everything has to be deterrent. That's great, because what that means is that we hang about 550 people a year, which is phenomenal if you're running an anatomy school. You have got this beautifully endless stream of kind of test subjects that you can go and you can start charging £7 a ticket for your lectures, do the dissection, show the students. They can all get a body each. They can all have a go as well. And it's doing wonders for medical science. Trouble in the late Georgian period, then, when we start getting a bit more civilized. So post about 1805, 1810, we start to come up with things like transportation and imprisonment and other things to punishing crime. So we go from hanging about 550 people a year to hanging about 50 people a year. But now we are talking that there are medical schools all over the country with about 150, 200 students in each, all of which that are needing to do a dissection of a human cadaver in order to become a surgeon. So there's then this demand for human corpses, and this is where this black market comes in. Now, because they're just not hanging enough people to meet that demand. So you start to get them what are known as the resurrection gangs. Now, initially, a few students will go and source their own. Actually, the first recorded body snatch that we've got is two Aberdeen University students who were caught attempting to steal a body out of a graveyard, which I think is impressive because I was an anatomy student. I struggled to get up for a 9 o'clock lecture in the morning, let alone go out at 2 o'clock in the morning and actually dig up my own test subjects. So hats off to them, but they got rumbled. And as this goes on, you start to get it impacting on the reputations of would-be doctors and things like that. You start to need to seek professional help. And that's where the resurrection gangs come in, the body snatcher that we know and love. Because this isn't just some Georgian peasants with a shovel making a little bit of money on the side. This is absolutely huge organized crime, massive business, really is.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, carry on. Sorry.
yeah, so you'll get there is an art to it. There is absolutely huge kind of criminal organizations. The one that we know the most about is the Borough Gang of London, because beautifully Joseph Naples, one member of the Borough Gang, actually kept a diary. About 5 pages of it we still have in the Hunterian Museum in London. And it is a complete account book of what they're doing, where they're stealing from, how much they are selling the bodies for, which anatomists and surgeons school are buying them. You get in it little fabulous little bits that remind you that this is just like any other criminal organization. You get a reference where they actually can't go out on one night because 4 out of the 6 of them are too pissed to even think, because if you're going to get that amount of money, so you're going to drink it. You also get a really telling phrase in there called thing bad, which is thing is what a body snatcher will refer to the corpse as. And that is very much where they've opened the coffin and found that that is just too far gone to be of any interest whatsoever to an anatomist. And that was a really interesting point because you have a window to operate in. And this is the bit about body snatching that people very rarely kind of think about, which is you've got effectively a 14-day window before a corpse becomes too denatured to actually be of interest to an anatomist. So you've got to know where to dig, when to dig and who you're digging up to a degree, because you don't want to be opening up a coffin that's too far gone. That's not fun. You certainly don't want to be opening a coffin for somebody who died of, say, smallpox or, something particularly contagious. I'm not a disease expert by any stretch of the imagination, but you start looking at things like where you've got epidemics of typhus and you've got cholera and you've got TB and you've got all these things that you can pick up. The last thing that you want is that in a sealed wooden box that you're about to open up with a shovel. So there's this whole intelligence network that goes along with them. And we have this idea, this kind of, and I know we'll come to these guys later, this Burke&Hair idea that they're just like poor illiterates and things like that, which Burke&Hair absolutely weren't. But these guys, they can read, they can write. If you look in the sort of transcripts of the Borough Gang's diary, they've got almanacs of phases of the moon that are in there, because you don't want to be doing this on night and a full moon because people will see you. And they then widen this out to a massive intelligence network. So they will use women. And women are incredibly useful. Any ladies out there that are listening that feel that you can cry or go hysterical on command, the body snatching community needs you. Because what they would do is they would send these women off to funerals. So they would look in the Times, the newspapers of the time. They would look at the obituaries columns. They would look at the funeral announcements. They would be making notes as to where funerals are, because they want to get there the same night. What they're going to do then is they're going to send along a wife or a girlfriend as a mourner, a fake mourner, who can go and attend that funeral and go, yes, it was Uncle Jack. He was wonderful. He made jam. He was an absolute saint. A lot of good work for charity and so forth. And meanwhile, while this lady's going hysterical and making a scene, what she's doing is she's making notes as to how far down that coffin is. Are there any defenses on it? And I'll talk a bit about how you can defend against body snatchers a little later on. And what did they die of? That is vital importance. And some of these guys, the Borough Gang, capable of stealing 15 bodies in a night, which is an impressive feat, because they know exactly where they're going, exactly what they're doing. A good body snatcher can be in, body out of the ground, tidied up after themselves, and gone inside of 30 minutes. It's staggering stuff, yeah.
Yeah, really. And again, this is a whole, well, I suppose you could say community effort in a way. And when you think of body snatching, you think of two men and a guy like this picture here, just turning up and just digging up a body and off they go.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about it that way, and that industrial way of doing it. It's crazy. Really is. You really opened my eyes there a little bit. Can I just step back tiny little bit to when you said that at the beginning, when you were saying, you're getting this many people hung a year. Also, is that part of their, obviously, because they've committed a crime or they've been punished, obviously quite religious at the time, aren't they? So by not being buried as well and being given away to, is that sort of like a punishment on its own as well? Is that the way they're thinking?
Yes and no. So legally speaking, you can be basically sentenced to be hanged and dissected. This happened to Jonathan Wild. It also happened to William Burke. There's a number of people that were sentenced to be hanged and dissected. And it's very much because one of the things that we stopped doing in the kind of early Georgian period is gibbeting people. Okay, so no longer are we hanging them and then hanging them on a cage outside the city limits to rot. We just stopped doing that because we can replace it at that point with hanging and dissecting. Now, in practice, some people who haven't been specifically, explicitly sentenced to be hanged and dissected can still end up on an anatomist's table just on the basis of meeting demand.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is literally a fate worse than death. I mean, you are still going to get buried. You're just not going to get buried immediately. Also, you're not going to get buried intact. And that's the big, real kicker there, because at the time, it was a widely held religious belief that in order to get into the afterlife, you had to have an intact body.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least, I would say, all the constituent parts of it are still there, even if they're not necessarily attached. So, but once you've been dissected, you are going to be buried again. And in fact, there are cases. St. Bart's Hospital was one of these where the surgeon actually found wounds and marks on the body that he'd bought that suggested he'd already dissected this body once.
Wow.
They'd literally had it buried, and then they'd come across, dug it up again, and charged him £8 to get for the body back.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of money.
Yeah, and again, this is, it's like a organized crime drug gang, isn't it? Sort of thing. It's at that level.
Yeah.
Just never thought about it like that. Okay, so what kind of methods are they using to get these bodies in, Paul? Just tell us about that.
Okay, so first of all, then, I'm really glad that you've put this picture up. Okay, because this picture is almost 100% wrong when it comes to what a resurrection gang's actually doing. Okay, because what they've got here is, I want you to notice towards like the bottom right of that image there, they've actually taken the coffin out the ground.
Mm-hmm.
That is too much work. That is way too much work.
It's
going to take you. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to dig one up, but they take a long time. I haven't myself dug an actual coffin up, but I have dug up a pine box of similar size that I buried in my back garden to see what effort it would actually involve to get one out of the ground. It will take you a long time, even if there's like 2 or 3 of you. And you really don't want to be hanging around in a graveyard too long. So you're doing this at night. You don't want to get caught. So time is of the essence. And bearing in mind that the quicker you can get the body out, the quicker you can move on to another body. Time is money. And this is all about money. So what they would do is they would actually find the funeral itself, find the grave. You'd go in at the head end. Now, it was easy to spot which is the head end because in Christian graveyards, they all point the same way. Basically all point east. They point the same direction as the church. So you know where the head end is. What you're going to do then is you're going to start digging down small shaft at the head end. We're not in the realms of 6 feet under standardized graves. That's a Victorian thing. Okay. So you are looking at somewhere between 18 inches to about 12 feet. And that broadly depends on how much money the person being buried has got, because what you are effectively doing is paying a gravedigger for their time. So if you're going to go 12 feet down in the ground, it's going to cost you twice as much as going 6 feet down in the ground, which in turn is going to cost you twice as much as being 3 feet. So you're looking for the shallow ones, and you're looking, and you're starting down the head end, you just dig small shaft down. Once you get to the coffin, what you do then is you just break open that bit of the coffin. So using, like the guy's got the pickaxe there, break open that. Usually you would find that they would break them open with the shovel. Okay, you're using all the soil that you've dug out on one end of the grave to weight that down as well, which just braces it more. Break that open, and then you lean in. And you lean in with a rope or a couple of pair of like butcher's meat hooks, or when I've done it with a length of fabric that you go in and you basically just put it kind of under the armpits, around the back, through and up, and then pull it out across the arms. And then literally you can pull that body out of the ground without ever taking the coffin out. And then you clear it all up and you move on. Making an important point, only take the body, which I may come to in a moment. So doing that, you can do that in about 20 minutes. Take you about 10 minutes to tidy the grave back up, move on. This is how the Borough gang were getting 15 in a night between 6 of them. So this idea that we have and you see it in any representation of body snatching, where you see it on pub signs, you've seen it in this picture here, where everybody's pictured getting the coffin out of the ground. Not a chance. No. There is one that I researched, a chap called, what was his name? Thomas Brown. Beautifully described in the newspaper as a bricklayer of Seacroft who was never known to actually work. And he tried to steal the body of a 5-year-old girl from a local cemetery in my hometown of Leeds. He actually spent that long digging the entire coffin out of the ground. He created that much of a mess to the point where anybody in that area knowing coming the following morning would know that graves had been disturbed and a body snatcher had been around. Created such a mess that no resurrectionist could go back and use that graveyard again for a hell of a long time. He was actually handed over to the authorities by his own accomplice for basically creating that much of a mess and taking that long. He had to stop 3 times partway through because basically people kept looking out their windows to see what the noise was. He was an awful body snatcher. So yeah, he got handed over by his accomplice, William Yeardley. William Yeardley did actually sell the body before handing him over and then also claimed the £10 reward for information leading to an arrest. So he did quite nicely out of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's your chief method.
Okay. That's awesome. That really is. And again, it's crazy to think of this. I just thought it was like a couple of people turning up and that was it, I just can't get my head around it. But yeah, it's fascinating. Is there any other methods apart from that, Paul?
No, that is tried and tested simple one. You will see a few kind of what they call tunneling methods. And I've seen this cropped up. It cropped up originally in the Thackeray Medical Museum. Thankfully, they've taken it down from their various displays now. But the idea that what you would do is you would still start at the head end, but that they would tunnel down at about a 45, 60-degree angle to get to the end of the coffin, and then they would saw open that and pull the body out from there and up. I have found no references to that style ever being done. And if you just take a moment to think about it, it doesn't stand up to any sort of scrutiny. I mean, in a lot of the cases, you'll know roughly how far that your body is down, but you don't necessarily know how far across until you're actually hitting coffin. If you're trying to dig an andal tunnel, then number one, tunnels in graveyards are notoriously difficult to actually create because the soil itself is not good tunneling soil. We don't make graveyards on clay. Okay, you're going to make it where there's decent, soft soil, and if you try and tunnel in it, you're either going to face a collapse, so you're going to have to shore that all up, which means bringing a whole load of woodwork with you. Body snatchers are not up for that at all. That is too much work, too much time, too much risk of getting caught. Also, if you don't really know how far down the grave goes, you don't really know where your 45-degree tunnel needs to start. You may end up digging under the grave. You may end up digging over the grave. No, find the head end, easy to spot, straight down. It is really the only way that works. There are a few different tools that you can use for actually getting the body out. As I mentioned, I've used fabric, but rope. Sometimes they would just lean in and pull it up themselves. So you grab hold under the arms and then one guy pull the other guy's feet, bring the whole thing back up. There are a few occasions where, they've gone to get the coffin out of the ground, but these are basically just opportunist body snatchers, not really the sort of seasoned professionals that we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. And again, so what sort of state would they leave it in afterwards? Would you actually know, these guys are obviously they're professional ones. Would you know that they've been in the graveyard and taken a body?
This is one of the really tricky things about being kind of a historian of body snatching is that you can only really trace cases where people have been caught.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're looking, apart from the Borough Gang's diary, which is pretty much the only live primary source that we've got actually pertaining to a body snatching gang, the rest you're looking at court reports, trial reports, newspaper articles, parish records, parish newsletters, and things like that. But a good body snatcher who's found themselves a relatively popular graveyard, somewhere where there's a decent number of funerals going on. So if you take a large graveyard like Bunsell Fields in London, that was a Borough Gang favourite. They could get 10, 11 out of there in a night. And because it's such a large kind of graveyard, feeding a large area, there is a lot of funerals that go on in there. So like Bunsell Fields is hosting, 4, 5, 6, sometimes up to 10 kind of funerals in a day, per day. It's prime ground.
Mm-hmm.
And what you want is nobody suspecting you were ever there. So a good body snatching rule, okay, and this is one of the many rules of body snatching that I've kind of written, is number one, make sure all you take is the body. Do not take anything else. This is of vital importance. Rule 2, always tidy up after yourself. Because if people aren't suspicious, then people aren't going to be on guard. Okay. And when people start to get worried that body snatchers are working their area, they start to actually put in measures to defend against body snatchers, which makes your job harder. And this is an economy of scale. What you want to do is you want to be in, out, quick, gone, as many bodies as you can. You don't want anything in your way that's going to slow you down. So what you want is the wider general public thinking, yeah, this is a nice, safe place. Nobody bothers this one. My loved ones are going to be safe here. So decent body snatchers would leave no trace they were ever there. And I wonder, as I walk through, when I'm researching these things, as I walk through the churchyards of Great Britain, I wonder just how many empty graves there actually are.
I was just thinking exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Now, there was a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, there was a large project to move St. James's Churchyard in the centre of London, because basically it's on the HS2 route. So what they're doing, there's a huge archaeological operation to basically take all the bodies out of there and relocate them and bury them in Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey, and rebury them. So they excavated every grave that's in that graveyard. 1 in 3 had no body in them.
Wow.
And nobody was any the wiser to that until that archaeological project.
So that basically answers the question, that's how good they were, yeah. And
yeah,
like you said, unless you get caught. But so obviously I know you've said about how they would know how to steal the body, and you touched on that earlier. But again, how much of these bodies and the people they're selling to, how much are they fetching? And do these people actually know that the bodies have come from graveyards?
Oh, yeah. So most of the surgeons that are dealing with this are up to their neck in this, and they know exactly what is going on. They're not blind to this at all. So prices for a body they do vary. On the lower end, you are looking at around about £4. On the top end, you're looking at £10, £12. There is actually a quite unique case where a chap who was, I'm going to use the language of the time there, who was a freak. He was known as the Irish Giant. And he actually wrote in his will, made his friends promise that they wouldn't pass his body to anatomists. His friends broke that promise. They sold his body for £500. And that was like 1820.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. But you're looking at somewhere between £4, £10 for an adult body. You're looking at somewhere between £2 and £6 for the body of a child. And bear in mind, any surgeon who's getting the body of a child knows it has been sourced illegally, because we don't hang children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we punish them for various crimes, but we don't hang children. So if you're getting children or women, okay, we don't hang women either in the Georgian period. If you're convicted of petty treason, you're burned. Doesn't leave a body. So any woman or any child that is turned up on an anatomist's table has been sourced illegally. There's just no way around that. You get particularly extra money for women who died pregnant, people who have died of certain diseases, where you may want to, let's say, I'm going to use for example, if you wanted to see the effect of lung cancer on the lungs in the Georgian period, then you're identifying somebody who's died of that. Okay, you're getting your resurrection gang along to go and steal that body. That's stealing to order. You're going to pay quite highly for that. You can get 20, £25 for that sort of body. If there's a surgeon on the other end of it that feels that they're going to make groundbreaking discovery or leading in a particular field, they will steal to order. And because you've got a 14-day window of that corpse, that resurrection gang will rack up the price on the basis of that demand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to have a look at the amount of money that's actually kind of changing hands and the impact that has on your life, and I will warn you out there, ladies, gentlemen, listeners, Gaz, you may be considering a change of career as a result of this. Okay, so average wage of a guy that owns a shovel and a cart, basically the two things that you need in order to be a body snatcher, okay, in 1810 is 11 shillings a week. Okay, so you're thinking you're getting 8 times that just for the worst body. Like I said, the Borough Gang quite capable of getting 15 out in a night. Okay, we have the record of when they divvied up their proceeds at the end of a week. There's a gang of 6 of them. They each got £39, 13 shillings and 9 pence each as a gang of 6. That is 39 times what the guy that owns the shovel and the cart is earning. Now, I didn't factor this through an inflation calculator or anything like that because inflation's wildly unpredictable. What I did was I measured that against what a person of similar level would be earning today, i.e. national minimum wage. Now, this calculation's a couple of years old. I know the minimum wage has gone up a little bit since then. But that means that you would be getting £288,000 per year, and you're only working in the academic year because that's when all the students want. So you get 5 months off as well. So if you're looking at a salary of over £250,000 today, and the sort of holidays that even teachers would be jealous of. Fancy a change of career?
You're gonna jump at it, aren't you? You know.
Yeah, exactly.
You're
Exactly.
and so again, this gang of 6, they would have dug the body as well as organise the other stuff. So how did the trickle of money trickle down to the people, say, for instance, going and watching these funerals, say, for instance? And because obviously, like you said, one of the biggest gangs is Borough Gang. It must have been huge network of people.
Well, they've all got people that they can tap into and people that they hire in to do various things. Because when you bear in mind that you're getting like all that money, then it becomes very easy to pay somebody way more than they're going to earn normally in order to make your life easier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you got 11 shillings a week is you can drop £1 to any woman to go and fake a funeral. And this is assuming that they even needed to do that, because a lot of times what they would do is they would go and claim unclaimed bodies from the workhouses as well. They would just go up and go, yeah, okay, that's my Uncle Jack. Wonderful. I'll have that. There, they've got a free one that they're selling for £10. Workhouse is not going to really want to go to the expense of sorts and funeral and burial for that person if they can get away with it. So they don't ask too many questions. If you want gravediggers, sextons to be able to tell you where are the fresh ones, how far down they are, okay, they're earning £1 a night. So go in, pay them 3 shillings. You haven't even dented your own profits, and they've made 3 times their wage. If you're looking at guards, because people do put cemetery watchmen out there, then if you want them to turn a blind eye, just pay them more than they're getting paid. You'll find they will do. And you're not denting your profits at all. The amount of money to be made from this is phenomenal.
So again, they're using their wealth to make sure that they're not going to get caught, because they are going to grease the palms of all these different people in the walks of life. And again, this is a period where, people are quite poor, aren't they? So they're going to, like you said, they're going to take 3 shillings. It's life or death, really, isn't it? It's
who wouldn't?
Fascinating. Yeah.
Your big problem, and the people that you can't pay off, are relatives of the person you're about to steal. Now, they get pissed off if you go and steal their loved ones. They really do. And they will take steps then to defend. So what you find is that you start to see an increased number of families that will actually maintain a 14-day watch on a graveyard,
Mhm.
just on the lookout for body snatchers. Usually these are armed. There's a case in Dublin where a gang of 4 body snatchers was actually rumbled by family members of the person in the graveyard. That turned into an open shootout in the graveyard. So these people are guarding, but they're turning up with guns, ready to do some serious damage. Or you get, again, I mentioned earlier, where people are suspicious, they start to deploy defenses. And the defenses against body snatching are really interesting.
Yeah, we will get into that because I have got some really good pictures for that later on. But
Excellent. You just let me
yeah,
know.
I will do. I'll let you know about that. So obviously, again, I've got to question the moral compass of these people in the medical profession. But do you think they're not thinking about that? Do you think they're just thinking, well, we're making strides here in the medical professions, and again, this is an example of something like, I mean, if you're a student, you go and watch this body be disemboweled or whatever they do to it, and so yeah, their moral compass here, is it? Do they have one?
Yes and no. I mean, if you read the testimonies where surgeons, and it's rare that surgeons are actually brought up on any sort of charge here. It's not really a crime. It is more of a misdemeanor. But what you find is that the surgeons really believe that they are advancing the cause of science. And it's hard to argue with them, really, because if you just take a moment to think of the catastrophic effect on the medical and surgical profession that would be the case of not being able to source these cadavers, you are going to drop you're going to drop your qualified surgeons down to about 1% of where you could be. And that's going to create an awful lot of problems. And I do firmly believe that, anybody who's had stomach surgery out there, you've got body snatchers to thank for the fact that we know so much about it. Because that was one of the real things that they were dealing with here. Tumor removal. So they know where all the know where all the tubes are on the inside and things like that. Amputations, you can have a massive. Because bear in mind, we're dealing as well with a time before anesthetics. Yeah, anesthetics don't come for another 10 years during the golden age of body snatching. So if you're having a limb amputated, you want somebody who can do it and do it quickly. And that involves knowing where all the blood vessels are that you need to tie off in doing that. You need to basically cut yourself the various skin flaps to go over the stump that are long enough. You can't do this experimentally. There's a leading surgeon who's like up to his neck in body snatching called Astley Cooper. Very famous surgeon. He's one of the best surgeons of his time. And that's because he would dissect a corpse every day. He's always learning about placement of things and so forth. And his nephew also went into the surgery trade. Basically, he dissected one corpse to pass his exam, and then he set up as a surgeon. And he ends up actually trying to remove a bladder stone from a patient while the patient is still conscious. And he had no idea where he was going, no idea what he was doing. The guy was on the operating table wishing he was dead.
Wow.
As a result of this. A bladder stonectomy, I think it's called a lithectomy or lithotomy. It should literally, it would have taken Astley Cooper like a minute. It took Brantley Cooper like half an hour. And he still didn't have it. So you want somebody who can do this sort of stuff and do it quickly, because while you're on that surgery table, it's the guy that we've got here. Yes, he's dead, but you want somebody who's in, out. Robert Liston was arguably he was known as the fastest knife in the West. It was said that he could amputate a limb in 30 seconds. If you ever go into the Thackeray Medical Museum in Leeds, really, I recommend it to everybody. There's a cine reel It's this Victorian Edwardian cine reel of a doctor that's trained in that method, and it shows him amputating a limb. He does it in 1 minute. 1 minute from making the first incision to he is finished. And that full operation has actually been captured on film.
Well,
And is playable in there. And you only get that by having done it. You can't do it on live people. So if those bodies aren't there, then medical science is just held back. And medical is not just a case of like, oh yeah, we're advancing scientific interest because we're all lovely and academic. This is dealing with real people and real lives and real pain, and real survival rates. Joseph Lister is the godfather of anesthetics. Godfather of antiseptics. Absolutely revolutionizes the survival rates of surgery. If he couldn't have qualified as a surgeon, then he would have never been able to do that. And he had to qualify as a surgeon during this period when he's sourcing body parts from body snatchers, so that you can examine all these things. So
this
I
period
think
you really owes a lot to this profession, really.
I wouldn't like to say that the resurrectionist is a public service,
No,
but certainly
not.
you can't just view them as
So
evil
some of the
opportunists.
textbooks that come out, from this period are from people that have been body snatched and put on a table and dissected, and some of the techniques, and it's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we know so much about the human skeleton, the human muscle structure, is down to this. It is the golden age of the anatomist.
Amazing.
And if you think the body snatchers are getting a lot of money from it, that's got nothing compared to what the surgeons are getting. Because if you take Jonathan Hunter, who the Hunterian Museum is named after, then he is at the Great Windmill Street Medical School in London. He's sourcing bodies. Now, he's sourcing bodies for demonstrations, theatre demonstrations, where students are going to come in and watch that dissection to be done. Okay, he's got 120 students in that room. He can charge £7 a ticket. So he's knocking just under £1,000 in 1824 for that work.
So there's a real interest in this from again, so people are really interested in coming and watching this, even if they're maybe not a student, or
I mean,
sort of interest in this sort of really dark, weird. Well, I suppose it's not weird, but you know what I mean.
People do. So medical students, because they necessarily, need to. Other people who have an interest in science, who have an interest in anatomy, an interest in biology. So you get other lecturers, who's like your Charles Darwins and things like that. He's got an interest in anatomy. You've got people as well that are thinking, I'd like to be a medical student, so I'm going to go and get myself a little bit ahead of the game. As my £7, I'm going to see a dissection. I have to say, if I'd have seen a dissection before I became an anatomy student, possibly might have changed my mind.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I wouldn't want to see that, and I still wouldn't want to be afterwards either. So, yeah, no,
it's unnerving. It's not the worst procedure that I had to attend as an anatomy student, but it's up there.
Now, my wife actually did forensic science, so she had to sit in very similar. Obviously not that sort of thing, but obviously would see, them showing you how to, all sorts of things with bodies and stuff. Yeah. So, you know what I mean? Okay. So that, again, this lucrative business, this is awful. It's awful in a way, but in a way it's actually helping us move on. Now, there are two men in Scotland that take it to the next level, and you're just going to give us a brief overview of these two guys. You know who they are. They're called Burke&Hair.
Yes.
Is it Edinburgh?
Yes, it is. It is Edinburgh. I've been to a few of the churchyards that they're linked with. However, and if you take nothing else away from this presentation tonight, I want you to cling to this one fact here, is that despite the fact that Burke&Hair are the world's most famous pair of body snatchers, they never stole a body in their entire career. Okay, they are not body snatchers. They are murderers. I would dare even say serial killers. I mean, the first body that they sell, they didn't kill. Essentially, and again, where I talk earlier about, we have this idea of like Burke&Hair as these penniless kind of Victorian peasants. The Simon Pegg film really paints that picture quite nicely, but they're absolutely not. I mean, Hare was very middle class, owned a lodging house, and one of his tenants died owing him £4 in rent. And with nobody coming to do anything about this, effectively what they did is that they sold the body of that tenant to Robert Knox, the surgeon, the former curator of human remains at the Surgeon Hall Museum. And he bought the body. He bought the body for £7 and 6 shillings, I believe. I could be a little bit out on that. And then that kind of set them going. They saw the amount of money that they could get for it. Now, they didn't immediately go straight into, right, we're going to start killing people. But they could see that this was quite lucrative. After all, what they'd got for that body was well in advance what Hare was actually charging for the rent on that room. So the next one that they had a tenant that was on the way out. He wasn't well. He was very old. He was probably dying. But they smother him then and just help him on his way. So I don't think that they did kill him. He would have died anyway within the week. They just hurried on the way and then whipped that off down to Robert Knox. Now, Robert Knox, I will say at this point, has absolutely no idea that these people are being murdered. Okay, as far as he's concerned, he's just taking bodies in the same way that any other surgeon is taking bodies. Not pleasant, not strictly above board, but, we pin a lot on Robert Knox. I don't believe, nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that he actually knew that people were being murdered before the end. That's when they get the taste for it, and then they really start to just find people that nobody's going to miss, kill them, usually by strangling, usually by asphyxiation, occasionally by blunt force trauma, and then, again, take the bodies down to Robert Knox's surgery. I've been to Robert Knox's surgery as well. I wouldn't like to take a body down there. It's massively downhill on cobbled streets.
Oh, God. I liked your point at the beginning. You had your little history rage that, these are nothing to do with body snatching, but that is what we have been led to believe over time. Because I really thought, as soon as you mentioned body snatching to me, the first two people I think of was Burke&Hair. And it's like, whoa. It's really opened my eyes that if you want to learn something, you really need to delve in a little bit deeper. But yeah, okay, mate. Thank you for adding that and talking a little bit about that. And again, as you said, I know you're not super knowledgeable about that point of it. It's more the body, but I know one thing you are definitely going to like, and it's this. So, talk us about how they're going to protect their bodies. Because they're getting ransacked. They're losing all their loved ones, or so how do they protect them?
So there's a number of ways of protecting yourself against body snatchers or protecting your loved ones against body snatchers. Some of them go from the logical up to the absolutely over the top and bizarre. And this will be quite a segment because there's quite a few of them. So I'll start at like the poor man's end. Okay, there was an idea that went around. It disappeared quite quickly, where the people would leave kind of white pebbles on the top of graves. Because the idea being is that if the pebbles had moved, you could see if the grave had been disturbed. That didn't last long, because basically what that did was just signal to a body snatcher where a nice, shallow, recent body was. In fact, that as a defense actually attracted more body snatchers than it prevented. So word got round and that kind of thing stopped. But there is a poor man's defense that you can use that is devastatingly effective, and that is straw. Now, in the case that I mentioned earlier, Thomas Brown stealing the 5-year-old Hannah Heesom, her father had actually left instructions to the gravedigger to put a layer of soil on top of the coffin, a layer of straw, a layer of soil, a layer of straw, a layer of soil, and so on up until run. Now, it's important to note, body snatchers are using wooden shovels at this point. You don't use a metal shovel because metal shovels make a very distinct kind of grave diggy noise. That if you're walking past a graveyard at 2 o'clock in the morning and you hear that, okay, you're going to think, why is anybody digging at this time? I know what they are. So use a wooden shovel that makes a lot less noise. Now, trying to get a wooden shovel through a layer of straw is nigh impossible, and I've tried. So that is a poor man's defense. It's a very, very good one. The reason it didn't work in the case of Hannah Heasom is that what the gravedigger actually did was he put all the straw in and then put it on top of it. So when they hit the straw, they could just pull it out by hand. Whereas actually trying to get that shovel through where the straw is mixed in with the soil is an absolute nightmare. Then you can go a little bit further up the ladder to, what we sort of thing that we're looking at here. Okay, and that is you've got these cages or mort safes, or you can get mort slabs. And what that is, I'll start with a mort slab. Mort slab is literally a huge stone block that is lowered onto the top of the grave. This thing weighs tons. The church has to get in a whole rack and pulley system to lower it into place. And that's going to stay there for 14 days. You can actually rent them from the church. And after 14 days, knowing that your loved one has, I've seen that, it's beautiful, isn't it? Knowing that your loved one has decomposed to a level that no body snatcher is going to be interested in, then you can remove that and go on. And then you've got what we have here, the mort safe. Okay, so this is a metal cage. Now, how far they go down into the ground really varies a lot. So this is an example that's in the Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh. It's an absolutely beautiful example. One of the best preserved ones that we've got. Possibly also, I would say, the Cluny mort safes up in Cluny up to the north. Also good. Now, what this is effectively a cage. It's not a cage that's absolutely impenetrable. But what you're doing is, if you think of this in terms of what I've said right from the start, it's like body snatchers want speed and efficiency. So if they're going looking at graves, they're going scouting out a graveyard, what they're going to do is they're going to look at that, see a whining great big cage over the top of it and go, do you know what? That's too much work. Because we get the same amount of money for the shallow grave next door that has none of these things. So you can find in the case of mort safes that actually this cage doesn't go down that far because it doesn't need to, because nobody is going to try and dig anything up in there. Body snatcher's just going to look at that and go, no, I'm moving on. If you want to protect a family plot, a family lair, then you can get a caged lair. So these are the next level up. And there are 3 brilliant examples of these in Glasgow Cathedral. And beautifully, and thank you to Glasgow Cathedral for this, but beautifully, they've put all their graveyard paths on Google Street View. So you can actually take a virtual tour around Glasgow's Cathedral graveyard, and you can see the caged lairs that are still there. There's 3 of them. They're really beautiful.
Awesome. You know what I'm going to be doing later?
Yeah. If you want to go to the bazaar, okay, then we've got the cemetery gun, which is very simply a large bore musket that is sat on top of a gravestone with a wire going down into the grave, kind of tripwire going down in the grave. And it is probably the most expensive and the least effective method of dealing with body snatching going. Because basically the idea being is that you've got this huge cannon on top of the headstone, and as soon as there is enough pressure on that wire in the grave caused by a shovel to pull that trigger, the gun goes off, blows your bloody head off. Trouble is, number 1, you can just move out of the way. Number 2, you can just cut the wire. There is absolutely no deterrent to these at all. I mentioned earlier watch committees as well. There was one local to me that was they called it the Rothwell Grave Club. And what you could do is that you could pay them a monthly subscription, and when you died, they would mount a 14-day watch on your grave. And finally, right up there at the top, if you want to go truly bizarre, well, you've got to cross the pond and go to America. But they have, and we found a patent for this, what is known as the coffin torpedo. Now, I'm not a physicist by any stretch of the imagination, so I can tell you exactly how this works. But effectively, it is a it is bury your person, but fill that coffin with gunpowder. And then they set some form of electrical device within it. If that coffin is opened, that will spark the gunpowder. The whole lot will explode. I have no evidence of one of these actually being used, but that's only because there are no reports of one of these actually exploding.
Mhm. I'm glad you brought up the America actually, because other countries internationally, is this going on in other countries too, not just the UK?
It goes on. It goes on for longer in America than it goes on in Britain for the most part because the British bring in the Anatomy Act, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, whereas the Americans don't, at least for the first time. But America, I believe, again, not my area of expertise in terms of world body snatching, but I believe that they bring in the ability to leave your body to science before we do.
Mhm.
Because you can't leave your body to science until 1918, at least in the UK.
Okay, cool.
Um, but yeah, I
Interesting.
mean, body snatching in America then goes on to some extent after that, but it's not for the selling of corpses to anatomists. It becomes the ransoming of corpses back to their relatives.
Oh wow.
Three very famous attempted body snatches, one of which was successful. And those are Abraham Lincoln. The attempt to steal his body was actually rumbled by the Secret Service. They got tipped off about it and were waiting in that graveyard for that collection of thieves. Uh, Somebody tried to steal the body of Elvis Presley. In fact, that's the anniversary of that was either today or yesterday, I think, at time of recording. That one failed. Somebody actually did steal the body of Charlie Chaplin and ransom it back to the family.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah,
Never knew that. That's really okay. So how much of a so go back to the UK, how much of a crime was this at the time? And if you were caught, again, firstly, you've taken someone's loved one for a start, but again, how were they punished if they were caught?
it's surprisingly lenient because technically it's not a crime, or to say it's not a crime is a little bit disingenuous. It's not a felony. And so one of the basic tenets of all the anti-slavery legislation is that your body cannot be owned by anybody. You cannot be owned by anybody. So if your body can't be owned, then you cannot permanently deprive an owner of an asset. And that is the legal definition of theft. So in terms of the law, this isn't stealing. Because again, if I reiterate, the legal definition of theft is taking with intent to permanently deprive an owner of an asset. So it needs an asset and it needs an owner. Otherwise, it's not theft. And as such, there's like, for example, if you have we have the crime to do with vehicle crime of taking without owner's consent. Okay, because there was no intent there to deprive permanently of the asset. So people that go for a joyride, drop the car back, they've taken without owner's consent. It's a lesser crime. Very similar kind of thing. Without an owner and without an asset, you haven't got a theft. So what you're left with is basically the misdemeanor of grave desecration, okay, which carries with it about a £10 fine. Or in the absolute worst case where they've got really repeat offenders, I've found a couple in Leeds that were like sentenced to a year in York Castle Jail. But mostly it's a £10 fine. And that £10 fine is probably going to be paid by the surgeon that you're supplying bodies to. Now, the key point here, though, is remember that I mentioned right earlier on, I said, only take the body. This is really important. And again, going back to the idea that these guys are not, thick as pig shit, they've thought about this. So if you just take the body, you're fine. If you start taking things like the linen burial shroud or any jewelry that that person was buried with, like they've got a wedding ring on, okay? Well, those can be owned. They did have owners. And then you're talking capital theft. Okay, so theft to the value of greater than 5 shillings is one of those capital offences. And that's very, very different. Okay, so if you're starting to take out the grave goods, you are stealing. And pre 1815, they will hang you for that shit. After then, they'll transport you. Great example is a guy called, oh God, I think it's Samuel Elliott, I think he's called. And he steals a body, can't get the ring off the finger. Now, what he should have done is cut the finger off because no anatomist is going to be bothered about that. Should have cut the finger off and left it behind. But he didn't. He kept the ring on the finger, took the body, and he was actually caught leaving the graveyard. And when it was searched, the body was found. But because this gold ring was on there, he didn't face a £10 fine. He was transported to Tasmania for 7 years on the basis of theft. So they're really, really careful. And when I mentioned St. James's Churchyard earlier, where 1 in 3 coffins didn't have a body in it, what those archaeologists were finding is that all the grave goods were still there. And the successful case that I tracked in my local area, like 15-year-old girl called Martha Oddie, when her grave was discovered open, the clothing she was buried in and the tortoiseshell comb that she was buried with were still in the graveyard, still in the grave. Only the body had gone. And that's really important. So it's not strictly a crime, but you can accidentally commit a crime whilst doing it.
So what kills it off and why and when does it stop?
Okay, so it stops. Really, the only way to kind of deal with this is kill the market. Okay, you've got to kill. But it's like smuggling. Okay, if you want to stop smuggling, you can put all the efforts that you want to into stopping smuggling, but really what you need to do is kill that black market off. Okay, where people are prepared to pay for something to happen, that thing will always happen. So really, it's the trigger. Well, I'll talk about the one trigger first of all that everybody kind of thinks of, and that is the Italian boy murders and what known as the London Burkings. And because people now, unlike Burke&Hair, who kind of did a couple of movings on and things like that, John Bishop and his crowd just went all in, straight off, just kill people, sell the bodies, and so forth. And this, it is said, is led to such a public outcry that something needed to be done. Okay, this is in 1828. And as a result, in 1831, bill is put forward. In 1832, actually receives royal assent, and that is the 1832 Anatomy Act. What that enables is that unclaimed bodies from the workhouse can be sent to the anatomists for dissection. And like everything else, it's the bottom end of society that really suffers for this, because these people here that either dying in workhouses without relatives to come and claim the body, or in some cases with relatives but somebody who hasn't actually turned up to claim the body because they don't want the expense of the funeral. And these people are again being sent off to what is effectively a fate worse than death. Dissection is a criminal sentence. These people have done nothing wrong. But in order to deal with this, Parliament passes this thing that you can give away the bodies of the poor effectively. And that pretty much overnight kills the resurrectionist as a career option. Because why on earth would Astley Cooper be paying out £10 per body for 20 bodies a week when he can get them from the workhouse? And there's something like a statistic, like something like 53,000 bodies in the 3 years since the Anatomy Act was passed. There's this phenomenal amount of bodies that are just coming out of the workhouses to feed this, so nobody's paying for them anymore. Now, I have a slightly different theory. There's a couple of things that don't add up for me here. I don't have enough evidence to say that it wasn't the London Burkings that triggered this. But there is another thing that happens in 1828. And that is the first surgeon is fined for sourcing a body from an immoral source. Now, when you look at the people that Bishop and his gang are murdering, these aren't people that have the vote. These aren't people really that anybody dramatically cares about. They're certainly not going to bother one of the few members of parliament that we've got. They're putting them in no danger of losing the election or anything like that. So I don't really see that parliament is going to react in that manner because of this. It certainly wasn't widespread enough, I think, that it was a major problem. However, surgeons getting fined, well, then something should be done. Something must be done, because those surgeons are the sort of people that have the vote and therefore are a threat to a politician and can apply pressure and lobbying to a politician and will be the member of the same gentlemen's clubs, country clubs, will cross those paths. But like I say, that remains as theory rather than sort of proven fact, because I just can't get the evidence to back that up. But I've always got that little doubt in my mind. But yeah, in the UK at least, it's the 1832 Anatomy Act, just pretty much overnight kills it off. Joshua Naples, one of the Borough gang, actually goes, following the Anatomy Act, goes and becomes a mortuary assistant at St Thomas's Hospital, which is one of the places that he's spent the last 5 years selling bodies to.
Wow. So he actually benefits in the end anyway, and doesn't lose out. So that's got a happy ending for him. But
Ben Crouch, who was the leader of the Borough gang, he actually went off and bought a hotel in Margate or Ramsgate, I think. And he found that he wasn't a good businessman at all. That crashed and burned, and he died in poverty.
oh wow, yeah, and that's down my end of the country. Yeah, Paul. So how did you go about researching this stuff when you started this, and what was it that got you interested in the topic as well? You know.
Well, it started out from the Living History group that I'm in, because we were first of all asked if we could do any sort of medical history for chalk. And one of our members, Rory, really didn't want to do anything posh. So we thought, right then, okay, what's lower class and medical related? And we came up with the idea of a body snatch. Then we came up with the idea of actually demonstrating how to do one. And then, like I say, the more that you start to pull at this thread, the more interesting it becomes. And then, so I think I picked up some books on it. I'd never really thought about it beforehand. So I picked up a couple of books, 2 books in question that I would recommend. So first is this one here. I'll just show that up. And that is Body Snatchers by Susie Lennox. Absolutely brilliant book. Not just because it's written by an excellent historian, but she's actually an archivist as well. So it's one of the best indexed books that I've ever read. Really good for anybody who's looking for like an entry-level interest into this. And what she's got in the index at the back is separated out into bodies, places, body snatchers, and surgeons, that you can pick up who's buying these and sort of thing. Now, in there was a throwaway line in there, which led me to Martha Roddy, which was body of 15-year-old Martha Roddy was stolen from a churchyard in Armley in Leeds and was returned to her original grave after her uncle offered a £50 reward. And that's all I had. And then lockdown happened. So Martha Roddy became my lockdown project. So I started by searching parish records. So simply using things like Ancestry and Find My Past, getting the parish records and finding her in there. So I knew which parish she was dealing with. And once I knew which parish I was dealing with, I knew which church she was going to be buried in. So then contact the church, got absolutely nowhere at all. So then routed into the British Newspaper Archive, because this creates newspaper stories. Now, you've got to take newspaper stories with a pinch of salt. So I started working on the principle that if I could find three different articles that highlighted the same facts, I must be onto something. Because you get a lot of syndication of newspaper articles where you're just reading the same article in a number of different newspapers, but where it's got distinctly different text and so forth, but it's highlighting the same fact. I thought I'm onto a winner there. So from there, I managed to get out the date that the body snatch took place. From there, then I followed that thread. You get who stole her, you get how much they stole, how much they sold the body for. You can, with a bit of detective work out who they sold the body to. I then got the arrest, and then courtesy of that, I got the trial report and the sentence into York Castle Jail. I need to go up to York Castle Jail to get kind of any records of what that year was like in there. Then she starts to crop up on a few other records, a few other parish things, and employment records. So I managed to get roughly where she worked. And so I went along to Armley Industrial Museum and said, right, this is 15-year-old girl who's working in this mill. What's she doing? And they said, oh, she's probably going to be this, which is a piecer. And what that is, when you've got the carding machines that pull the wood out into threads, where those threads break, piecers run in, tie those broken threads together and get out before the machine comes back and starts mincing Georgian children as weaving machines are known to do. And they even let me have a go at it as well, and it's terrifying. I do not have the fitness levels to be able to do that. And then finally, having pulled all this information together, as I say, I got nowhere with the church when I contacted the vicar. However, then that blessed time in September that we have in the UK, which is Heritage Open Week, that's where you start to get into all the church historical groups. So I went along to the church in question, I spoke to their historical group and said, I found this. And then about a month later, I was contacted by their church warden. And she said, I found an archaeological survey of the graveyard from when all the headstones were removed. She had a headstone. And from there, been able to find the grave. So that was that was the complete journey. Now, like I say, sometimes you are running into absolute dead ends, where people, haven't got any further information. She's the only body that I've managed to take completely from theft all throughout journey. So I know where she was stolen from and when. I know what she died of. I know where the body was transferred into a coach. I know where it was addressed to and who it was addressed to. And you get this from every time you're just following a thread. Where else does it lead you? And that was it. Anybody can do this. I am not a pro historian by any stretch of the imagination. I just started down that thread and just kept looking and just keep adding things. I'm still finding articles now, about the theft of Martha Roddy, even 3 years after I stopped looking. Mm-hmm. So you just narrow down that search. But it's really, really good and fascinating way of getting to grips with archives for any beginner historian that's never wrestled with a primary source before. Knock yourself out.
Yeah, and again, you all find your path and what you really gets you motivated, and obviously that was for you, and it's great that you did that, and getting that closure, that must have been great for you.
Oh, it was a magical feeling. It took me a year of tracking Martha Roddy down, but I did it, and I'd actually contacted Susie Lennox and said, "Do you want to expand this into a further page?" Because
yeah.
I found her.
And how much I know she was only 15, but did you learn much about her life previous to her death?
I don't know much about her life because they're generally not recorded. I know that she died of what they call a short illness to the head, which is effectively an aneurysm. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I know what her job was like, and that is like 70% of a 14-year-old girl's life.
Wow. Yeah.
At that point. So I know what she was doing for a living. I don't know how much she got paid for it. But again, these are all things that there's still questions out there. I still have a mountain of questions to ask about Martha Roddy. And when I find the right people, I'll ask them the right questions.
Wow, fascinating. Now we're going to get on to a really, really important topic now, and all the other topics are important too, but this is important, and that is History Rage podcast. So, Paul, tell us about how it started and the idea behind, because it's quite a unique idea, your podcast, isn't it? So tell us about, how it got started and the idea behind it.
Well, the actual start of it was I planned to do some video work, and we'd gone down the Chalk Valley with a view to just creating some video stuff to put on social media or to put on YouTube. We didn't know what to do, so I came up with the idea of starting to grab speakers and just ask them, what is the one thing you wish everyone would just stop believing? Every historian's got one. Bet you've got one. I've certainly got one.
Oh God.
I've just raged at mine with Burke&Hair and not body snatchers.
Yeah.
Um, everybody's got at least one, if not more than one. And I was actually quite successful with that. I managed to get Dan Snow to record one. I got a few of the other speakers around there, people like Guy Walters, James Holland. And then it dawned on me that most of history was in the South, and I live in West Yorkshire. So I wasn't going to be able to maintain this as a video platform. But then it occurred to me, very much make a podcast. So I contacted pretty much everybody that I knew, which was about 12 people, and asked, would you be interested in doing a recording for this? And my first one was 3 years ago, and that was to kick off my rage there, which was actually our first episode was Burke&Hair and not Body Snatchers, and that was done by Kat Irving, who is the current conservator of human remains for the Surgeon Hall Museum, which is actually Robert Knox's old job. And she did our first, and then I think it was about 5 episodes before somebody contacted me wanted to talk about their book, so I got them on. And then at the end of series 1, sort of episode 9 and 10 of series 1, I got Helen Fry and James Holland, pretty big names, and that kind of cemented me in there.
Yeah.
And then, so I did a series 2, and it's just carried on that. And I'm currently recording, I'm currently editing and recording series 15. So we're 3 years in now. We ask everybody the same question. What is the one thing you wish everyone would just stop believing? We light that blue touch paper and let them rant. So we've had James Holland doing the Battle of Britain is not a close run thing, and nobody should have been surprised by Blitzkrieg. We've had Peter Caddick Adams on Montgomery. What a bell end! We've had I've had Tracy Borman on. Elizabeth I did care about Anne Boleyn. Yes, any period of history.
Really.
If you want to hear angry historians, that's where we are.
And again, you have a weekly episode, is that correct?
Every Monday. Yep.
Every Monday. Okay, so again, if people want to find you, they just have to put in History Rage podcast and Google, or
yeah, anywhere where you find this, you can find History Rage. We are an audio only, so we're not on YouTube, but everywhere else, go Apple, Google, Spotify, all the big players, all the small players, we're out there. Just search for History Rage, or you can listen direct to the website at historyrage.com.
Mm-hmm. And I will leave the links for History Rage podcast in the podcast description. Okay, so Paul, anything that no, sorry, yeah, I wanted to also ask, because obviously you do quite a lot of history festivals as well, don't you? So tell us a little bit about that. You get around a bit, don't you?
Yeah, I get around too much. I mean, at the time of recording, I think I'm 2.5 weeks away from the Gloucester History Festival, where I'm attempting to go down there and record an episode per day to release through the festival. I'm a pretty regular in the performance area at the Chalk History Festival, as it's now known. So if you go along there next year, you may be able to see us actually demonstrate a body snatch using our cross section of a grave. We've done demonstrations of bare knuckle boxing, Victorian Gentleman's Guide to Self-Defense, guides to World War II knife fighting, and so forth. And yeah, so if you want to keep hold of the where we're at in terms of the living history, then digging on the Living History Group website, which is foreignfieldlhg.com. And I'll tell you where we all are. I'll make sure
that link's in the podcast description as well. Yeah, so that's the name of your group then, I take it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so, of course, you go along to all these festivals, you get this, like you said, you're there and you you're rubbing shoulders with some big name historians, and I mean, I've been to Chalk myself. I know there's some big names, and so you do interview them while you're there as well, don't you? Like you said, do podcasts with them.
Yeah, as and when I can. I mean, I'm mostly down at Chalk as a performer, but I'm very much down at Gloucester as a podcaster. And I've also been invited to the first Imperial War Museum Podcast Live Festival this year as well, which is the 19th of October.
Wow.
So you can buy a ticket there for a History Rage live recording. And I'm going to be talking to one of their museum directors about the myth that Britain stood alone in the war.
And is that Imperial War Museum London? Is that right?
Yes, Imperial War Museum London, yes.
That would be cool. Okay, Paul. Well, all that is left to say is thank you very much.
Oh, it's been an honour and a privilege, Daz.
It's been an honour for me as well, and thank you very much, and cheers.
Cheers.